I'll be able
I'll
to
get
read
you.
right over top of that and talk into that.
Yep, camera's right there. And I'll get a picture for you.
Great. Running.
Um,
I don't know what camera you use.
this one right here.
This. Man, Hef was telling about Progressive Trail Design. They hire
Okay.
part-time trail maintenance
Good to
guys
go.
to go out with a weed eater or pick and shovel.
You set them all up and we'll get.
Clean up these mountain bike trails. Really? Bad. Marley. What's it pay? About $20 an hour. That's about quarterly off. Right? Put hang garlic clothes around my neck.
Okay.
I'm gonna.
One of the things we had this year.
Yeah.
I see a video where they showed the
They're
picture.
getting news back.
Around it, it was-
You want to go ahead and start here, Dr. Thompson?
Yeah.
All right, man. Everybody logged on?
Everybody's logged on already. Good.
I may look into it.
All right, guys, can everybody see me? Give me a thumbs up or something like that. All right, everybody's good to go. All right, well, we've got a few things to discuss today, and we're going to be doing this remotely, which I think is the first that we've done this. So since everybody doesn't follow my InstaSnap, Tweaker, book page, social media, we're going to do a few things today. So we got a few topics to go over. And some of these, I'm going to be citing these papers periodically, mainly just so I make sure that I cover the things that the National Registry wants us to go over. But we basically got three topics that we're going to go over today. And one of them is post-resuscitation care and a few principles behind that. We're going to go over congestive heart failure a little bit, talk about some basic principles there. And then also we're going to talk about a concept called a clean kill that has to do with ventricular tachycardias. So that's kind of an interesting topic, and it's outside the ACLS measures, and we're going to talk about it. But it's at the end of the day, it's good medicine. But we'll get to that. So let's first go over post resuscitation care. And Leon will have these sheets or have them accessible to you, but these are the contents of the things that we want to go over on post-resuscitation care. And the concept is a couple of things that I want to talk about specifically are what to do when you do get these patients back, and we hope that you get back more of them than as opposed to less of them. When you do get them back from a resuscitation event, what do you do now besides, change your pants or pat yourself on the back? Because we don't get a lot of these folks back, but we do get some, and the ones that we do want to get back, we want to really optimize their care. So let's talk about two classes of these people that we get back. The ones that we get back and they're responsive, and the ones that they're not responsive. And I'm going to do some really basic principles here, because sometimes I think we get caught up in the minutia. And if we go back to some basic principles, we'll really can do some things that change how we care for these patients. So, all right, you got a patient that is in cardiac arrest or in VFib or what have you, and let's say you do a miraculous measure, you shock them, or you do a chest thump, or you just pray and they get back, they wake up and talk to you. All right, and they do. There are some of them, those guys that have been doing this long enough, especially the younger ones and some of the older ones. when you get them back, sometimes they open their eyes and they start talking to you, and that's great, and that's what we want, and such. And you know, I've had some over the years. You shock them and they sit up in bed, and kind of catches everybody off guard, but it does occur. These are the easy ones to take care of. All right, really just support them. All right, you know, just support them. Make sure that you've already got everything going. You got IV lines started. You're supporting them from an oxygenation standpoint. And the main thing is to provide supportive care to them, whether it be with fluids, oxygens, monitors, and just get ready for things that can happen. Because sometimes when they wake up, sometimes they go back out. So have all those things ready. And when you do get somebody back in that situation, just support them in a very broad sense and be ready for the other shoe to drop, because sometimes it does happen. All right. Start thinking about, okay, well, why did they go into arrest? Why did they go into arrhythmia? Why did they go out? And if it happens again, what am I going to do next? All right. So get those principles. These patients do not have to be cooled. You know, and I've had some people argue over here, oh, well, you know, we're supposed to be doing post-resuscitation cooling and so forth. And you know, they get these patients back from a resuscitation, and then they're like, well, now we got to start cooling them. And they wanted to put them back to sleep and start cooling them, because cooling is not for the awake and conscious person, it's not necessarily a pleasant event. So that's not why we cool, all right? And we're going to get into that with these patients that we get back from a resuscitation and they're not talking to us, or they're not alert, or they're not conscious. So that's the second group of patients that I want to go over with post-resuscitation care. All right, so, and this is the ones that happen more common than not, particularly in the Bella Vista population. So you go out, you have a patient that's in an arrest or an arrhythmia, and they are unconscious, or you worked their code for, you know, set amount of time, and then you finally get back a spontaneous circulation and or spontaneous respirations. But they're not talking to you, they're not waking up, or they might be, you know, a little bit of purposeful movement of an arm or a leg. They might be biting the tube a little bit, those types of things. But these people are definitely not awake and alert. They still have a GCS, you know, way down 6 and below. What do we do with these patients? Well, we do all the same things we did with the first class of patients. We want to provide cardiac and respiratory support for them and get ready for what's going to happen next, or what could happen next when the other shoe drops. Why did they get in this situation before? Is it from an arrhythmia? Is it a drug overdose? Is it a metabolic issue with their electrolytes? Is it a toxicology standpoint? Is it a STEMI? Is it a non-STEMI? You know, be thinking about why these patients got in this situation and get ready for it. Because particularly on your longer transports, which you guys have up here, whatever got them in that situation, you know, you've drug them back out of the woods, but they're not completely out of the woods yet, because they could get drugged right back in. So get ready for that. So let's talk about post-resuscitation cooling and why we do it. A few years ago, and you guys that haven't been doing this very long, this may be the only paradigm that you know, is there was this really, really big push to cool these patients that we get back from a return of spontaneous circulation, ROSC, return of spontaneous circulation. And the belief is that we were getting some of these patients back, and we were getting their heart back, and or we were getting their lungs and or their kidney back, but we weren't necessarily getting their brain back. All right, they had been down too long, they had been acidotic too long, we had worked the code too long, and you know, we're not going to answer that question today, whether that's morally right or morally wrong on some of these patients. But you know, we've had, you know, folks over the years that work a big long code, and everybody thinks it's a useless cause, and we get them fired back up. Some of those people we didn't do any favors, all right, because they ended up either having a prolonged illness or a prolonged demise, ended up dying in the ICU days or weeks later, or they did wake up and they had neurologically, they just weren't all there. So there was some research, and we used to do this with pediatric patients, even 20 some odd years ago. It wasn't mainstay medicine, but I remember doing it because there was solid research on it. Is if we had kids, it all went back to the premises. If Junior falls through the ice and we retrieve him and resuscitate him, even though in all clinical pictures he looks dead, he's not dead until he's warm and dead. Right? Everybody remember that mantra? So, because a lot of these people, particularly kids, you would wake them up or you would warm them up and they would wake up and their heart would fire back up and a lot of them would have really miraculous recovery. So the initial research said, okay, well, let's start doing this with kids. And they were doing it with sudden infant death syndromes. They were doing it with pediatric resuscitation and so forth. If we got a kid back, and the smaller the kid, the better. If we got a baby back, we would start cooling them, and we would externally cool them. We would pack ice around their head and in their axillas and their armpits. And then from there it went to chilled IV fluids or, putting deep peritoneal lines in and putting cool saline in their abdomen, trying to cool them off to protect their brain until we could get them to a children's hospital and put them on ECMO or what have you. And then they would keep them cool and unconscious for a few days to let the brain recover and then start waking them up. So that's kind of where that initial research was coming from, and we were having pretty good results with it. Of course, nobody really knew how to do it specifically. We had some principles, but there wasn't a set protocol because one, these things don't happen very often, and two, it's hard to get anybody to sign up for that kind of clinical research. So it was all coming out of, animal labs and so forth. And then things got politically correct and you can't do animal labs anymore. So we kind of lost some of that research for several years. So, and these guys have been doing this a while and know, what was in favor for a while will fall out of favor. And then a few years later, it'll fall in favor again. And there's a whole new generation of doctors and paramedics and nurses and lawyers that think, oh, this is new and cutting edge. And there's old curmudgeon guys sitting in the back in the rocking chair going, oh, shit, we did this 20 years ago. And we're just calling it a different thing, or we're doing it with a new catheter or a new technique or what have you. And that's where some of this cooling and return of spontaneous circulation came back in vogue a few years. And it came in vogue pretty hot about 5 years ago. And it was malpractice if you weren't doing it, and everybody needed to be doing it and so forth. Now the pendulum has swung back a little bit more, where maybe don't need to cool everybody that we thought we needed to cool, or we need to cool them a little bit different than we did. But there's still a large percentage of these patients that we need to cool. Now, I don't want you guys getting so concerned about cooling patients. I want you to understand a couple of the basic principles behind it, but we are getting to the point in EMS where we have so much great technology, and the paramedics are some of them anyway are getting smarter, and they're learning a lot more, and that's great. And it's really great to be progressive and cutting edge. But at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do in so much amount of time. And all of you guys have been in the back of a squad and know how, the primary goal is to get them to the hospital and get things taken care of. And there's just so many boxes you can check. There's only so much technology and medications and so forth that you can throw at them. And I don't want you so caught up on doing the sexy cutting edge stuff at the end that you're forgetting some of the basic things. And that's one thing that I have seen over the last 5 years or so, not here, but just across EMS in general, is we're putting so many tools in everybody's toolbox now, and everybody wants to use the latest and greatest and new tool. And I understand that. I've been guilty of that too. And we do need to do some of that to sharpen our art and push our skill set. But sometimes they forget the basics. Or they're so hung up on getting them set up on a monitor and so forth, they hadn't even looked at the patient or talked to, got a limited history, and they're missing the forest for the trees. But the basic principles of cooling are important, and we want you to get set up for that and understand some of why we do it and so forth. Chilled IV fluids is probably the easiest thing pre-hospital that can be done. When they get to us, we put a cooling catheter in them. And I call it a Christmas tree because it kind of looks like a Christmas tree, but it's a long femoral catheter that we put in the groin, and it goes up in the vena cava, and it's got little triangles or road cones stacked along the sheath that go up this catheter. And through these little balloons, we are pumping a cooling solution. So we are cooling them from their vena cava, we're cooling them from their core out and trying to protect their brain. And we'll put those in. Sometimes we'll wait till they get to the ICU to put them in. But if we put them in, then the ICU doctors can keep them cool for a day or so. Usually it's overnight, and then they'll start looking at brainwave activity and let the dust settle, make sure that cardiovascular they're stable, that they've had some recovery and so forth. They've had to talk with the family. What are we going to do? What are we not going to do? And then they decide, all right, we're going to start warming them up and waking them up. So that's the basic premise on ROSC. And let me make sure here I didn't miss anything that they wanted me to go over here. And this is really pretty basic principles here. So a couple of points that they wanted to make sure that we were taking care of the basics. So we recognize the return of spontaneous circulation, and we talked about that. Optimizing ventilation and oxygenation in post-cardiac arrest patients, maintaining a SAT of greater than or equal to 94%. It's kind of a no-brainer there. Once you're in tidal CO2 between 35 and 40. Monitor your hemodynamics. Be cautious with hypo or hypertension. Prepare for arrhythmias. That's going to happen. And then they talked a little bit about cold application as far as intentional reduction of the core temperature, putting cold packs in the axilla, the groin, and the neck, cool IV fluids, putting Foley catheters, esophageal probe. That you guys got enough to do. You don't need to be worrying about that. And then we talked about the 2015 guidelines as far as keeping them cool overnight and making the decision on where to send them. Where do you send them? Well, you need to send them to a place that can handle STEMIs and PCIs, and they've got an ICU with critical care docs. I know Mercy's got that, Regional's got that. I assume Northwest has got it also. Those are pretty basic things to do. So any of the hospitals in this area should be able to more than handle that. Okay, let's talk about CHF. How are we doing on time? We doing good? Good. All right. Talk about some basic premises on time. Or I'm sorry, on congestive heart failure. So let's go back and think about things in really simplistic terms, because I think sometimes we get caught up in a lot of the fancy vocabulary